Lara, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I mean, what a beautiful place to be.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is a fun place to be, fun place to have this conversation. I want to ask about the Chiefs, of course. You're the CMO of this iconic organization. How do you balance between thinking about traditional opportunities to connect with this longstanding brand and also bringing in innovation?
So I joined the organization 4 years ago in July, and one of the main reasons I joined, or was so intrigued and to join the organization, was because of that exact challenge. The Chiefs are a storied organization, starting with Lamar Hunt, our founder, who really was such a pioneer in his time of actually being one of the original people that helped to create the NFL. And yet that kind of reflection against what has been happening over the last, let's call it, 10 years, but certainly over the last 5 to 8 in terms of the success that the team is having, and just being such a big part of culture. And so to be able to come in as the first CMO and to help amplify what was already in place, I think is what excited me. And I think there's not a perfect balance, right? I think in our core mission statement, we talk a lot about honoring legacy. I think that's what makes us unique. I think that's what ultimately fans connect to, is that we have a history, we have a story, we have a place in people's lives for many years. But I think creating innovation in a way, or working with innovation in a way that makes sense to that legacy, is where we found the sweet spot. And so now, using that from an innovation lens, how do we find new ways to enhance the fan experience that may look really different in the year of 2025? So content obviously being a huge driver of that, but really media relationships that allow for the Chiefs to show up to new fans or more fans in places that they might not have seen us before, I think is where we try to find that connection between innovation with who we are from a legacy perspective.
Lara, did I hear you say you're the first CMO for the Chiefs?
I am, yes.
How were they getting by before that? I know they were getting by.
They were doing just fine before me. I think it's a great example of just what's happening in sport in general. So many of these sports clubs, brands, leagues have been just such a big part of culture for so long, and honestly really have organically grown, which I feel like in this day and age, for a brand to organically grow is not that easy to do, right? Just with the world we live in and social media and everything. But for so long, the brand really existed in its core element and core product, which was the game experience, right? And the focus was, how do we make sure that we're filling a stadium so that people can experience? And that's still the core of our business. That kind of is what I say, like, makes the world go round. It is our flywheel. But now the world has changed, and the brand, as we say, exists 365 days a year to millions of fans all over the world. And so I think that was the shift that our founder and chairman and CEO Clark Hunt and our president really kind of pushed over the last 5-6 years, to say we want someone to come in to help kind of bring that to the next wave. So yeah, I'm the first one. Hopefully doing well so far.
Absolutely. So, of course, fans are at the center of so much of your marketing strategy, but there is brand messaging you want to put out into the world that, of course, is considerate of fans, but also non-fans who could become fans. What is that overarching message that you want every person to know about the Chiefs?
So there's really, from a consumer-facing perspective, to your point, we have had an influx of casual fans, if you want to say, that have come into our fold, certainly over the last couple of years with the success on the field and lots of things that have happened in culture. But also how a fan interacts with a team, and especially the Chiefs, has just changed over time. People no longer are only becoming fans from living in Kansas City, right? We have, I've been lucky this week to walk around, and the amount of, moms and dads that have walked up to me and been like, oh, my 7-year-old who lives in California is a Chiefs fan because of Patrick Mahomes. Or, I knew something that you guys did with one of your military non-for-profits that really impacted my family, and that's how I became a fan. So a lot of different ways that they're coming in. What we're finding is that the casual fans are oftentimes a bit more passionate. And so we talk a lot about Chiefs Kingdom. That's how we call our fan base. We talk a lot about them being the loudest in the world. So our stadium is actually the loudest stadium in the world based on a Guinness World Record that was broken many years ago. And so the messaging that we've been starting to really put out is about Chiefs Kingdom kind of being wherever you are and really the kingdom heard around the world. This idea that wherever you are, as a passionate, if you think about sound as an equation to like passion, if we're loud in the stadium, you can also equate that to how a fan feels.
What needs to happen so that you can be the world's team? I'm sure you're building a roadmap to think about what needs to actually be achieved. So maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. One, and I'm sure obviously we're both Americans sitting here in France. American football in the U.S. is obviously huge, right? It is by far the largest sport. It is by far kind of, from a share of mind perspective, certainly the largest one from a fan base, media attention. Globally, though, American football is still quite small in comparison to soccer, in comparison to basketball in some countries, even some comparison to some smaller, what we would consider in America, smaller sports, but cricket, rugby, in Germany, handball is a huge sport. So I think the first and foremost is this acceleration of growing the game of football and that awareness of what American football is. I think that's really a key linchpin, and that's why the NFL has been pushing this internationalization, the globalization of the sport. That's why we've been playing games more internationally. That's why there's NFL player programs where we're trying to bring players in from other countries, right? Obviously, that's a huge driver. So that's kind of the critical linchpin in doing this. But to that point, I'm a huge believer, and I think that's why the league has shifted as well. We talk a lot around passion points of like the culture side of it, right? So fans at the end of the day are probably coming to the Chiefs for a lot of reasons. One, the championship mentality, right? That's happening on the field. Winning by far clearly helps, right?
Yeah.
Being in the Super Bowl back-to-back is a huge part of it. But that's also then you think about it more from a media landscape. And we were talking obviously before we started, I come from a media background, started my career at a media agency. Being within fans, whether it's TV screens, social media screens, whatever it is now, is a huge driver. Frequency matters. And so I think that's kind of the second big linchpin is we need to show up more often. And if we're not going to always show up in a timing that makes sense, right, because games may be late at night or whatever it may be, then we need to find other ways to have the game show up or our brand show up more often. So content has become a huge part. I feel like everyone's buzzword around content, right? Like that is what kind of makes our brand unique. Our reach and scale in terms of our social platforms and our media platforms, and then also finding ways through non-core football activations to bring the brand to life. So for example, flag football is a huge opportunity. Participation in the sport's a huge driver of the game and the Chiefs.
I also heard you say, of course, like it's not in your control if the team wins or not, but every NFL team's objective is to win, right? And win as often as possible.
Yeah.
But there's an interesting thing about audiences. There's folks that love a winner, and then there are eventually fans that love to hate a winner.
Yep.
How does that play a role in how you market when you have been a back-to-back championship team?
Yes, it's definitely been a big conversation over probably the last year, just with the amount of success that the team has had. And winning in sports is one of those very interesting things because, I was talking about it the other day, you only see the end result, right? The amount of effort that the players and the coaches and the athletic trainers and the staff and everyone puts in to preparing for that success, and pursuing, as we talk a lot about this, pursuing greatness, this constant day over day impact, you only end up seeing the end results. And so there has been this narrative, certainly over the last year, I think, perhaps warranted because of the years of success, but I think it was accelerated just because of the world we live in now as it pertains to social media, right? Everything is so real time. And I'm sure, as you're scrolling through your feed, it's almost like an overwhelming amount of things. And so what we try to do is, again, really focus on I believe, and I think it's at the heart of who the Chiefs are, that we are a humble organization we're a small Midwest team that has been put in a position by a lot of hard work to achieve success. That being said, there's a humble spirit in who we are that's where the brand part is really important that we come through.
I work in a media-based space, so I've got to ask you some media questions. You have
Yes,
a
of
media
course.
background
Yeah.
as well. So embracing innovation with media and advertising in mind, how important are some of these emerging spaces? I know TikTok's not quite emerging anymore,
Yeah.
but when looking at opportunities to engage with younger fans or just fans that embrace innovation, how is that showing up for the Chiefs?
So our main outlet for communicating, and if we want to say advertising our brand, is through our social channels. So something that many people I think don't realize as it pertains to the league, which I think is a really important context for setting up why channels like TikTok, Instagram, YouTube is a huge driver, Snapchat, huge driver of ours, is within the US, because there are 32 teams, the league is really set up to support each other, right? That's why we're part of the league. But in that model, every club has a designated area, home market area, that they're allowed to actually advertise in, right? So to put paid dollars against. In our case, thankfully, we're in the middle of the country, so you have a little bit more room compared to some of the East Coast teams, which are all kind of stacked on top of each other. But when you have that context, we are allowed to put paid dollars and allow for corporate partners to advertise our brand or leverage our brand within basically Kansas, Missouri, and a little part of another state. Once you understand that, you realize, well, if you're trying to become a national brand and an international brand, using the power of social media, which is obviously, borderless in that case, right? Especially organic social, you realize the importance of those channels. That really is our main media. And so in a world where, where organic reach for most brands is next to impossible, right? And paid advertising and advertising in the more classic ways is where their business sits. Ours is completely different. Organic social is where our main business is. It is the media channel that we have. We treat each channel similar but different, obviously, based on the audience.
I'll ask you a little bit of a personal question. You're not coming from a sports background. You even, I don't know if I should say this, you said you weren't a big sports fan to begin
up,
with.
no.
So how was that transitioning from coming from very different verticals or industries and bringing your skills over to the NFL, specifically the Chiefs?
Yeah, no, I didn't grow up as I grew up playing sports, and I grew up, watching sports, but it really wasn't a core part. And certainly the NFL, I didn't have a team growing up in the same way that so many people now have a passionate team. I have a 6 and 8 year old, and they are very passionate about the Chiefs through and through now, which is so fun to watch them kind of grow up in that way. And I came from large, CPG led marketing led organizations. I think that has given me the right perspective coming into a solid organization that was looking for growth. I think I've always tended to gravitate towards opportunity even within large organizations that are somewhat entrepreneur in nature, in the sense of they have an opportunity or a problem to solve, however you want to use that word, and there perhaps isn't a perfect roadmap to get there. So that mentality of being autonomous, that mentality of, quite frankly, throwing out the playbook or writing it from scratch, I seem to gravitate towards. And I think I've been able to take a lot of the fundamentals in brand building that I was given and learned at places like Anheuser-Busch and L'Oreal, who are best in the business in terms of growing and building brands, and apply that to the Chiefs. But then taking a bit of that media background and that digital first background and social first background that I have, and applying it in a way that the brand just requires a very non-traditional way of thinking, right? You don't have, again, the traditional methods of, just going and buying the impressions through TV, right? Or just even having gigantic budgets to go and buy Super Bowl ads. We don't have that. What we have is a whole other avenue of media content and creative thinking to grow the brand. And that background, I think, of mine was able to bring it and apply it to this industry and this brand of the Chiefs. Sports are such a big part of the world right now. They've always been, but I feel like, I'm sure you feel it this week, it's kind of everywhere. I think it's the one thing that still is uniting people. It's the one thing where there's still a live audience. It's the one thing that you feel like has endless opportunity in terms of storytelling.
So I have to ask this question because it's been brought up so many times. So I apologize for
It's
asking
okay.
to begin with. People want me to squeeze in asking about Taylor Swift, but I
Yeah.
think I'll ask around Taylor Swift. I
Sure.
think there are phenomenon that occur that are beyond the scope of anything that you have planned for. You don't plan for it, it happens,
Yeah.
but you can't ignore it, and you have to think about the way in which the team is going to react from a marketing perspective. Whether it is a surprise NFL billionaire girlfriend or somebody else or some other circumstance, what does the conversation look like when it's outside of your scope and control?
You cannot plan for anything that has just happened over the last many years. I almost am glad that we never planned in that way for it, but we had always had this mentality of preparing for success. Our president, Mark Donovan, says that that's kind of his, mantra, if you want to say. And I think if the organization had not been very clear on who we were, what has happened over the last couple of years could have gone a very different way. We can't control other media, obviously, right? And it became a media story, as it should been, because it was it's just such a great story, right? And I think people just love stories and love great stories. So why wouldn't we want that? Ultimately, we're a sports organization. Travis Kelce is a player. He is a human. He is a brand. He is his own creative person. And so we've tried to find ways that felt authentic to who we were. I think what you see in the stadium, for example, looks very different than what you even may see on some of our social media channels. And I say that specifically to that conversation, right? In the stadium, when all of that craziness was happening, you really would never have known it. We weren't showing her on boards. We were trying to respect her as a fan and as a personal relationship, which it is. And so for those fans and that experience in stadium, to really not only just respect them, but ultimately to respect the fans who are coming for the game, right? And respect season ticket holders who this is a big part of their lives. We didn't want to interrupt that experience. That being said, on social media or in partnership with Hallmark, where they created a love story, that's the perfect way to do it, where it was a nod to obviously everything that was happening. It was part of the cultural zeitgeist, but it was done in a way that kind of had the wink and the nod, and that felt right for that audience and that channel and for that kind of story.
That's what it comes to mind for me is you can't overreact, but you also can't underreact or ignore it. There's like a right balance, and I think there's a sophistication with which you're handling things, which feels right on the money from my perspective. So.
Thank you. I'm happy to hear that. Yeah, and we, Mark has said, and it's right. I think if we all look back and 10, 15 years from now, and it's somewhat overwhelming and humbling to think of. When you're at a brand like the Chiefs, you're just, again, such a big part of the cultural zeitgeist and history. I think we would be not doing our jobs if we didn't find a way to take the right advantage of everything happening, that what's happening on the fields, just the way that the world has changed in terms of the love of sport and content and the global, like all of those ingredients. If we aren't doing this now, we have failed, quite frankly, at our jobs, but doing it in a way that has longevity to it. And that to one of the questions I think you were asking too, around without upsetting the core apple cart, right? Like we have a core fan that was coming to us for a very long time, that has been incredibly loyal, that has been a big part of our business, but really our fan base from day one. If we do things that alienate them and ultimately alienate ourselves from ourselves, in 10 years, we'll also have realized that we didn't do our job well.
This has been really revealing and interesting.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
And I think we'll leave it at that.